Is it just a story? Or is something else going on? People have been fascinated by ancient tombs for centuries. We dig them up, we study them, we put their contents in museums. But sometimes people associated with these discoveries get sick. They have accidents. They die. It happens just often enough that we have a word for it. A curse. The idea is simple. An ancient king or queen did not want their rest disturbed. So they placed a magical curse on their tomb. Anyone who enters will suffer. Scientists say it is nonsense. They talk about toxic mold, ancient bacteria, and just plain bad luck. But the stories persist. The coincidences pile up. A string of deaths follows the opening of a tomb. A powerful nation invades a country just days after a warlord's grave is opened. It makes you wonder, are these curses real? Are they just warnings from the past we fail to understand? Are they the product of media hype and our own love for a good scary story? Or is the truth something in between? We think we know so much. But the ancient dead might still have a few secrets. They might still have a way of protecting their own. Number 17. Did a vengeful king explode in his own coffin? Let's start with a king, a very famous one, William the Conqueror. He was the Duke of Normandy who invaded England in 1066. He won the Battle of Hastings and changed the course of English history forever. He was a tough, ruthless man. He was also, by the end of his life, very large. And this is where his story gets strange. In the summer of 1087, William was at war in France. During the siege of the town of Mantes, his horse stumbled. The king was thrown forward against the pommel of his saddle. It was a serious internal injury. His intestines ruptured. He retreated to a nearby monastery in Rouen, but it was no use. Sepsis set in. For weeks, he lay dying in agony. He died on September 9th, 1087. This is where the curse, if you can call it that, begins. It was not a curse on those who would disturb his tomb. It was a curse on his own body, his own funeral, his attendants, the noblemen who had served him, abandoned his body as soon as he died. They fled to their own lands to secure their property in the chaos that follows a king's death. The lower level servants then stripped the room bare, taking weapons, furniture, even the king's clothes. His naked corpse was left on the stone floor for hours. Eventually, a simple country knight named Herluin took pity on the abandoned king. He arranged for the body to be embalmed and taken to the Abbey of Saint Etienne in Caen, a church William himself had built. But the problems were just starting. Along the journey, a fire broke out in the town where the body was resting. The funeral procession was broken up. Then, when the body finally arrived in Caen for the funeral, another disaster. A man named Asselin stood up in the middle of the service and declared that the king had stolen the land the church was built on from his father. He forbade the burial. After a tense negotiation, Asselin was paid off. They could finally bury the king. But there was one last problem, a big one. The tomb had been built for William's size when he was younger. In his final years, he had grown extremely fat. The weeks of infection and decomposition after his death had caused his body to bloat with gas. The stonemasons had made the tomb too small. The funeral attendants tried to force the massive, swollen corpse into the stone sarcophagus. Well, they pushed and shoved. And then it happened. According to the medieval chronicler Orderic Vitalis, who was born just a few years before the event, the pressure was too much. The king's abdomen burst. A foul, horrific stench filled the church. Incense and perfumes could not mask it. The priests rushed through the rest of the service. The mourners fled. William the Conqueror, the man who had conquered England, was unceremoniously shoved into his tomb, a ruptured and reeking mess. It was a deeply undignified end for such a powerful man. The desecration did not end there. His tomb was disturbed multiple times over the centuries. In 1562, during the French Wars of Religion, Calvinists broke it open looking for treasure. They found none and scattered his bones. Most were lost forever. Only a single thigh bone was recovered and reburied. Then, during the French Revolution, his tomb was destroyed again. The last remaining bone was lost. In the 19th century, a new marker was put in place. It marks an empty grave. So was it a curse? Or just a series of unfortunate and rather gross events? The science is straightforward. A ruptured intestine would lead to a massive infection. That infection, combined with the summer heat, would create a huge amount of decomposition gas. It is a natural process. The greed of his followers and the political chaos are also easily explained by human nature, not magic. But the sheer string of disasters, one after another, feels like something more. It feels like the world was rejecting the body of this brutal king. It feels like a curse of legacy, a final act of rebellion against a man who took so much by force. What really happened to the last of his bones after the French Revolution? Could DNA testing on the residue in the original tomb confirm it was him? And is it just history, or does the land in Normandy in England still carry the scars of his violent conquest, a kind of curse that lasts for centuries? Number 16, can a dead girl still open her eyes? Some tombs are not about kings and conquests. They are about tragedy, about a life cut short. That is the story of Rosalia Lombardo. She was not a queen or a warrior. She was a little girl who lived in Palermo, Sicily. In 1920, when she was just 2 years old, she died of pneumonia. The Spanish flu pandemic was raging, and it is likely what took her. Her father, Mario Lombardo, was devastated. He could not bear the thought of losing his daughter forever. So he did something unusual. He hired a man named Alfredo Salafia. Salafia was a brilliant chemist and a master embalmer. He had developed a unique and secret technique for preserving the dead. Mario Lombardo asked Salafia to preserve Rosalia, to keep her looking as if she were just sleeping. Salafia did his job almost too well. He injected Rosalia's body with a mixture of chemicals. The formula was a secret he took to his grave, but years later, researchers found his personal notes. The mixture was formalin, zinc salts, alcohol, salicylic acid, and glycerin. The formalin killed all the bacteria. The zinc salts petrified the body, making it rigid and preventing it from decaying. The glycerin kept her skin from drying out. The salicylic acid killed any fungi. It was a chemical cocktail of near-perfect preservation. Rosalia's body was placed in a small glass-topped coffin in the Capuchin catacombs of Palermo. And there she rests today, over a century later. She is known as Sleeping Beauty. Her little face is framed by blonde curls. Her skin is still soft-looking. A yellow ribbon is still tied in her hair. She looks, for all the world, like a doll, like a little girl who could wake up at any moment. And that is where the creepy part begins. For years, people who visited the catacombs swore they saw something strange. They claimed that Rosalia's eyes would slowly open and close throughout the day. Photos and time-lapse videos seem to confirm it. In some pictures, her eyelids are completely closed. In others, they are slightly parted, revealing her intact blue eyes. It was a terrifying and fascinating phenomenon. Was it a miracle? A sign from beyond? Was the little girl's spirit still attached to her perfectly preserved body? The story of the blinking mummy spread around the world. It became one of the main attractions of the catacombs. People would stand and watch, hoping to catch a glimpse of the supernatural event. The monks who cared for the catacombs had no explanation. It seemed to be a genuine mystery. Then, in 2009, an Italian anthropologist named Dario Piombino Mascali decided to solve the puzzle. He was the one who uncovered Salafia's lost notes, revealing the embalming formula. He also turned his attention to the blinking eyes. He spent hours observing the coffin and the body. He realized that the glass on the coffin was slightly distorted, and the light in the catacombs changed throughout the day as the sun moved across the sky. His conclusion was simple. It was an optical illusion. He explained it in a statement to the press. Rosalia's eyes were never fully closed to begin with. They were, and always had been, slightly ajar. The light filtering through the side windows would hit her face from different angles. As the light changed, it would illuminate different parts of her face. This changing light, combined with the angle from which people viewed her, created the illusion that her eyelids were moving. It was a trick of light and shadow, nothing more. To prove his point, the curators of the museum moved her coffin slightly. They shifted its angle to prevent the light from creating the same effect. The blinking stopped. But the legend remains. Even with a scientific explanation, the image of a dead child opening her eyes is a powerful one. It taps into a deep fear and a deep sadness. Is the scientific explanation the whole story? Could the shifting humidity and temperature in the catacombs cause slight physical changes in the body, making the eyelids contract and relax? And why, out of the thousands of bodies in the Capuchin catacombs, is Rosalia Lombardo the only one who looks like she just fell asleep yesterday? Number 15 was a king's treasure, protected by the threat of war. Curses do not always have to be supernatural. Sometimes the curse is the brutal reality of the modern world. In 1939, England was on the brink of war with Nazi Germany. People were preparing for the worst. Air raid sirens, blackouts, and the threat of bombs were becoming a part of daily life. It was in this tense atmosphere that one of the greatest archaeological discoveries in British history was made. The story begins with a woman named Edith Pretty. She was a wealthy landowner in Suffolk, England. Her estate included a series of large, mysterious earthen mounds. For years, she had wondered what was inside them. She was a spiritualist, interested in the afterlife and communicating with the dead. Friends said she saw ghostly figures on the mounds at night. In 1938, she decided to have them excavated. She hired a local self-taught archaeologist named Basil Brown. He was not a flashy academic from a big university. He was a practical, experienced man who understood the local soil. He started digging. At first, he found little, but in the summer of 1939, working on the largest mound, he started to find iron rivets. And then he uncovered the clear impression of a massive ship in the sandy soil. It was over 88 feet long. He had found an Anglo-Saxon ship burial. As he excavated further, he found a burial chamber at the center of the ship. And inside, a treasure that stunned the world. There was a spectacular helmet with a human face mask, a huge shield, a sword, gold buckles, silver bowls, and coins from the Merovingian kingdom in France. It was the richest burial ever found from this period in northern Europe. It was likely the tomb of Raedwald of East Anglia, a powerful king who died around 624 AD. But as this incredible discovery was being unearthed, the curse of the 20th century was closing in. The threat of war was growing every day. The British Museum sent its top archaeologists, like Charles Phillips, to take over the dig. They knew they were in a race against time. If war broke out, this priceless and fragile treasure could be destroyed by a German bomb. The discovery was kept a secret from the public to avoid attracting attention. The team worked frantically through August 1939. They carefully lifted the artifacts from the ground, cataloged them, and packed them. On September 1st, Germany invaded Poland. On September 3rd, Britain declared war. The treasure had been removed just in the nick of time. Edith Pretty, in an act of incredible generosity, donated the entire find to the British nation. The treasure was taken to London for safety, but even there it was not safe. It was stored in the Aldwych tube station, a disused London Underground tunnel, along with other national treasures. It spent the entire war underground, protected from the blitz that rained bombs down on the city. The Sutton Hoo site itself became a military training ground. Tanks rolled over the very mounds where the treasure was found. After the war, the treasure was finally put on display. The story of its discovery and its narrow escape from destruction made it famous. It was not a pharaoh's curse that threatened Sutton Hoo. It was a modern curse. The curse of total war. The artifacts were not protected by ancient magic, but by the frantic work of a few dedicated people and a lot of luck. The ghost stories Edith Pretty told were just that, stories. The real threat was very human. What other treasures might still lie buried under the remaining mounds at Sutton Hoo? If Basil Brown had started digging just 1 year later, would the entire find have been lost to history? And does the fact that this pagan king's treasure was saved from a modern war by being hidden in the earth feel like a strange echo of its own burial, almost 1,400 years earlier? Number 14, what happens when a queen is painted red? In the dense jungles of southern Mexico lies the ancient Mayan city of Palenque. It is a place of stunning pyramids and intricate stone carvings. For a long time, archaeologists believed that the pyramids were just temples or astronomical observatories. They did not think they were tombs, like the pyramids in Egypt. That all changed in 1952 when the tomb of the great king, Pakal, was found deep inside the Temple of the Inscriptions. But another, more mysterious tomb was waiting to be found. In 1994, an archaeologist named Arnoldo Gonzalez Cruz was doing routine restoration work on a smaller building next to the Temple of the Inscriptions, known as Temple the 13th. He noticed a small blocked-off doorway. He and his team cleared it and found a narrow corridor leading deep into the pyramid. After weeks of careful work, they broke into a hidden chamber. Inside, they found a plain stone sarcophagus. But the room itself was not plain. It was filled with precious grave goods, jade masks, pottery, and the bones of a male and female sacrificial victim. But the most striking thing was the color. Everything in the tomb, including the sarcophagus and the bones of the main occupant, was covered in a thick layer of bright red cinnabar powder. When cinnabar is a toxic mineral, It is a mercury sulfide. The Mayans prized it for its brilliant red color, which they associated with blood, life, and rebirth. They used it to paint temples, pottery, and in this case, the bodies of their most important dead. When the team opened the sarcophagus, they found the skeleton of a woman. She was covered head to toe in the red powder. They named her the Red Queen. This is where the idea of a curse takes a very real physical form. The curse was not a magical spell, it was poison. The air in the sealed tomb was thick with mercury dust. The archaeologists had to wear special protective gear to work in the chamber. Anyone who inhaled the cinnabar dust could suffer from mercury poisoning, which can cause severe nerve damage and death. The Red Queen was protecting her tomb not with magic, but with chemistry. But the real mystery of the Red Queen was her identity. The tomb contained no inscriptions, no name, no clues as to who she was. She was clearly a very important person. The quality of the jade in her funeral mask and the location of her tomb, right next to the great King Pakal, told them that. She had to be royalty. Scientists got to work. Facial reconstruction techniques were used to create a model of what she might have looked like. She was a strong-featured woman in her 60s. DNA analysis was done on her bones. They compared her DNA to the DNA of King Pakal. They were not related, so she was not his mother or sister. The leading theory, put forward by researchers like Gonzalez Cruz, is that she was Ixtzakbu Ajau, the wife of Pakal. The historical records match. She came from a nearby city to marry Pakal, which would explain why her DNA was different. She also died around the right time. The Red Queen's curse was real, but it was scientific. A layer of poison to deter looters. But her story is also about the curse of anonymity. To be so powerful in life, to be given such a rich and important burial, and then to have your name completely forgotten for over 1,300 years. The work of archaeologists has given her back a possible name and a story, but the final proof is still missing. Will we ever find an inscription that confirms her identity beyond a doubt? What other toxins and poisons did ancient cultures use to protect their tombs, turning old legends of curses into modern scientific hazards? And does the thick red cinnabar tell us more about Mayan beliefs of the afterlife than any writing ever could? Well, number 13, can a piece of silver carry misfortune? Sometimes the curse is not on a tomb, but on a single object found within it. An object that seems to carry death and misery with it wherever it goes. That is the story of the Bassano Vase. The legend is a chilling one. It begins in the 15th century in Italy. A young woman was getting married. On her wedding night, she was brutally murdered. As she lay dying, she clutched a silver vase that she had received as a wedding gift. She swore that she would have her revenge on whoever had killed her, and that the vase would bring death to all who possessed it. After her death, the vase was passed down through her family, and the curse seemed to work. According to the story, each family member who owned it died a mysterious or untimely death. The family grew terrified of the object. They decided they had to get rid of it. They supposedly hid it away, burying it in a secret location. Some say it was placed in a lead-lined box and buried by a priest. For centuries, the vase was lost to history. The story was just a local legend. Then, in 1988, it was supposedly unearthed. A man digging in his garden found the old lead box. Inside was the silver vase. There was a small parchment note with it. It read, "Beware, this vase brings death." The man, thinking it was a joke, ignored the warning. He sold the vase to a local pharmacy for a small sum. The pharmacist who bought it reportedly died of a mysterious illness within 3 months. His family sold the vase to a surgeon. The surgeon died 2 months later. The curse was back. The vase was then sold to an archaeologist who also died within months. By this point, the story of the cursed vase was spreading. It was offered to museums, but none of them wanted it. No one would touch it. The last known owner was a private collector who, after a series of terrible misfortunes, became so desperate that he tried to give it away. Finally, the story goes, the police were called. The family of the last victim begged them to take it away. The police, not wanting the cursed object in their evidence room, supposedly buried it again. This time, they put it in an unmarked location, perhaps inside another lead box, hoping it would never be found again. Its current location is unknown. It is a great story, a cursed object, a trail of bodies, a secret burial. But is any of it true? This is where the story gets difficult. Unlike King Tut's tomb or Otzi the Iceman, there is very little hard evidence for the Bassano Vase. There are no newspaper articles from 1988 detailing its discovery. There are no police records of it being confiscated. The names of the supposed victims, the pharmacist, the surgeon, the archaeologist, are never mentioned. The story exists almost entirely on the internet, passed from one paranormal website to another. Skeptics, like investigator Joe Nickel, have pointed out that the story has all the hallmarks of an urban legend. It is a tale that gets more dramatic with each telling. It is impossible to verify. It is likely a modern piece of folklore, a ghost story for the digital age. The idea of a cursed object is ancient, but this particular story seems to be a new one, dressed up to look old. So, is the curse of the Basano Vase that it brings death? Or is the real curse that it is a story without an origin, a piece of fiction that has taken on a life of its own? Where did the story of the Basano Vase actually come from? If it does exist, where is it now? And how many other stories of cursed objects are out there? Not as ancient artifacts, but as modern myths we create and share ourselves. Number 12. Why can't we find the world's greatest conqueror? Some tombs are cursed to never be opened, but one tomb is cursed to never even be found. This is the final resting place of Genghis Khan. He was one of the most successful and most brutal military leaders in all of history. In the early 13th century, he united the Mongol tribes and created an empire that stretched from China to Europe. He conquered more territory than anyone ever. But when he died in 1227, he vanished. Genghis Khan wanted it that way. He gave explicit instructions that his burial place was to be kept an absolute secret. He did not want a grand monument. He did not want anyone to know where he was laid to rest. He wanted to return to the earth, undisturbed, forever, and his followers made sure his wish was granted. The legend of his funeral is terrifying. A huge funeral procession carried his body back to his homeland in Mongolia. According to the stories which were written down much later by historians like Marco Polo, the soldiers of the procession killed every person and every animal they met along the way. They did this to ensure no one could ever report seeing the procession pass. When they reached the secret burial site, a tomb was dug. He was buried, possibly with immense treasure. Then the real horror began. The slaves who had built the tomb were executed by soldiers. Then those soldiers were executed by another group of soldiers. This second group of soldiers was then executed by a final loyal guard. This chain of death was designed to eliminate anyone who knew the location. To hide the site completely, they say 1,000 horses were ridden back and forth over the filled-in grave to trample the ground flat. Then they diverted a river to flow over the site, hiding it under water. Others say they planted a forest on top of it. Whatever they did, it worked. For almost 800 years, nobody has been able to find the tomb of Genghis Khan. This is the curse. The tomb is not cursed to harm those who find it. It is cursed to be unfindable. In modern Mongolia, Genghis Khan is a national hero, a founding father. There is a deep cultural belief that his tomb should not be disturbed. Many Mongolians believe that if his tomb is opened, a terrible curse will be unleashed upon the world, an apocalypse that will bring an end to everything. The spirit of the great Khan, they say, must be allowed to rest in peace. Despite this, many people have tried to find it. Archaeologists from Japan, the United States, and Europe have launched expeditions. They have used satellite imagery, ground-penetrating radar, and historical texts. In 2004, a Japanese-Mongolian team claimed to have found Genghis Khan's palace, which they believed was connected to his burial site, but they found no tomb. A fascinating project was launched by Albert Yuman Lin, a researcher from the University of California, San Diego. He used a non-invasive approach. He asked thousands of online volunteers to scan high-resolution satellite images of Mongolia, looking for unusual geographical features that might indicate a tomb. The project identified dozens of potential archaeological sites, but the tomb itself remains elusive. The search is a massive challenge. The Mongol Empire was huge. The potential search area covers thousands of square miles of remote, difficult terrain. And the cultural resistance to disturbing the site is a major factor. The Mongolian government is very hesitant to approve large-scale, invasive digs. So the curse holds. Genghis Khan, the man who reshaped the world, successfully erased his own final resting place from the map. His desire for secrecy has outlasted empires, technology, and centuries of curiosity. But will modern technology ever be able to locate the tomb without disturbing the ground? If it is found, should it be opened, or should the wishes of Genghis Khan and the beliefs of the Mongolian people be respected? And what is the greater fear, a supernatural curse, or desecrating the grave of a man who is a national icon? This is number 11. Can a prince's words curse a king? Not all curses involve ghosts or poison. Some curses are written in stone. They are promises and warnings left by the dead for the living to read. And sometimes people listen. The tomb of Edward of Woodstock is one such place. You probably know him by a different name, the Black Prince. He was the eldest son of King Edward III of England and one of the greatest knights of the Middle Ages. He was a hero of the Hundred Years' War against France, famous for his victories at the battles of Crécy and Poitiers. He was the perfect medieval prince, chivalrous, brave, and a brilliant military commander. But he never became king. He died in 1376, 1 year before his father. His own son, Richard II, would inherit the throne instead. The Black Prince knew he was dying. He had been suffering from a long illness, probably dysentery, that he picked up while campaigning in Spain. And he planned his own funeral and his own tomb in meticulous detail. He wanted to be buried in Canterbury Cathedral, one of the holiest places in England. And on his tomb, he wanted a long epitaph, a poem, to be inscribed in French. This poem is the curse. It is not a curse on tomb robbers, it is a curse on the living. It is a stark reminder of the reality of death. The prince speaks directly from the grave to anyone reading the words. He says, "Such as thou art, sometime was I such as I am, such shalt thou be." He goes on to describe his own decay, how his great beauty has vanished, how his body is now just dust. It is a powerful piece of writing, a direct confrontation with mortality from a man who had been the pinnacle of life and power. He was buried exactly as he wished. His tomb is one of the most magnificent in the cathedral. A bronze effigy of him lies on top, dressed in full armor. Hanging above are replicas of his real military achievements, his helmet, his shield, his gauntlets. And around the edge of the tomb are the words of his poem, a permanent warning to all who pass by. The curse is not that something bad will happen to you if you touch the tomb. The curse is the words themselves. They get into your head. They force you to think about your own death. But there is another layer to this story. A story about a king who failed to heed the legacy of the prince. The prince's son, Richard II, became king as a boy. He grew up to be a very different man from his father. Where the Black Prince was a warrior, Richard was a man of peace and art. He was also seen as a tyrant. He clashed with his powerful nobles. In 1399, he was overthrown by his cousin Henry Bolingbroke, who became King Henry IV. Richard was imprisoned and likely starved to death in Pontefract Castle in 1400. The connection to the Black Prince's tomb. One of the main charges against Richard II was that he had betrayed the legacy of his noble father. He had not lived up to the model of chivalry and strength that the Black Prince represented. The tomb, sitting there in Canterbury, was a constant physical reminder of the kind of ruler Richard was supposed to be, and the kind of ruler he was not. In a way, the legacy and the words of the Black Prince did curse his son. The expectation of his greatness was a weight that Richard could not bear, and it led to his downfall and death. Is an epitaph just words, or can it carry the weight of a command from beyond the grave? Did Richard II's failure have anything to do with the psychological pressure of his father's memory, symbolized by that tomb? And when we read those words today, "Such as I am, such shalt thou be," does a piece of the Black Prince's 600-year-old warning still have the power to curse us with the truth? Number 10, can a mummy tell us how he was murdered? Some mummies are famous for who they were. Others are famous for how they look. And one is famous because it looks like it is screaming. It is known as Unknown Man E, or more famously, the Screaming Mummy. It was discovered in 1881 in a royal tomb cache at Deir el Bahari in Egypt. This was a hiding place where priests in the New Kingdom had reburied many royal mummies to protect them from tomb robbers. The cache contained some of the most famous pharaohs in history, like Ramesses the Great. And then there was this one, it was a complete anomaly. All the other mummies were carefully prepared. They were wrapped in fine linen, their organs were removed, and they were placed in royal coffins. Unknown Man E was different. He was buried in a plain, undecorated coffin. He was not properly mummified. His organs were still inside him. Most shockingly, his body was wrapped not in linen, but in a sheepskin. In ancient Egypt, sheepskin was considered ritually impure. To be buried in it was a sign of deep disgrace. And then there was his face, his head is thrown back, his jaw is wide open. His facial muscles are contorted into what looks like a silent, eternal scream of agony. For over a century, no one knew who he was or why he had been buried in such a strange and disrespectful way. The theories were wild. Was he a foreign prince who died in Egypt? Was he buried alive? Was he poisoned? The mystery was a perfect subject for modern science. For years, Egyptologist Bob Brier championed the theory that he had been murdered. The way his body was treated suggested a palace conspiracy, someone who needed to be buried quickly and shamefully. In 2012, the mummy was part of a major scientific investigation led by Zahi Hawass, the former head of Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities. They used CT scans to look inside the body without unwrapping it. The scans revealed several key facts. The man was young, probably in his late 20s. His organs were intact, confirming the hasty mummification. But they also found something else. They saw markings on his neck consistent with hanging or strangulation. His neck was compressed, and there were injuries to his throat. The scream was likely the result of his jaw falling open after death, a common occurrence if the jaw is not bound shut during mummification, a step his buriers had skipped. The final piece of the puzzle came from DNA. Scientists took samples from unknown man E and from the mummy of Ramesses III. The results were a match. They were father and son. This identified the screaming mummy as Prince Pentauer. And this is where history clicks into place. An ancient document known as the Judicial Papyrus of Turin describes a real-life conspiracy to murder the pharaoh Ramesses III around 1155 BC. The plot was led by one of his secondary wives, Tai, who wanted to put her son Pentauer on the throne. The plot was discovered. The conspirators were put on trial. The papyrus says that Pentauer took his own life. The scientific evidence suggests a different story. It seems more likely he was executed, probably by hanging. The shameful burial in a sheepskin was his final punishment. He was a traitor, a prince who tried to kill his own father, and he was denied a proper burial that would grant him a peaceful afterlife. His curse was not to haunt his tomb, but to have his crime and his ignoble end written on his own body for 3,000 years. The science did not uncover a curse, it uncovered a cold case murder. What was the final exact cause of his death? Is suicide or execution? Can further analysis of the body tell us more about the poison some of the other conspirators used? And how many other curs? Mummies are just victims of ancient crimes waiting for modern science to tell their story. Number 9 is a diamonded tomb for a cursed god. A curse does not always stay with a body. Sometimes it attaches itself to an object. Beautiful, glittering object that people would kill to possess. The most famous cursed object in the world is not a mummy or a vase. It is a stone, the Hope Diamond. The story of the Hope Diamond is a mix of fact, legend, and pure invention. It begins in the 17th century in the Golconda mines of India. The original stone was much larger, a massive deep blue diamond called the Tavernier Blue. The legend, which was likely invented much later, says that the stone was one of the eyes of a statue of the Hindu goddess Sita. A French gem merchant named Jean-Baptiste Tavernier stole the eye from the statue. As he fled, the priests of the temple put a curse on the stone and on all who would own it. Tavernier sold the stone to King Louis XIV of France in 1668. The king had it recut, and it became known as the French Blue. It was worn by French royalty, including King Louis XVI and his wife Marie Antoinette. And here the curse seems to kick in. Both Louis and Marie Antoinette were famously beheaded during the French Revolution in 1793. During the chaos of the Revolution, the French blue was stolen from the royal treasury. It disappeared for about 20 years. A blue diamond of a similar, but smaller, size surfaced in London in the early 1800s. It is believed that the French blue had been recut again to disguise its identity. This new stone eventually came into the possession of a wealthy London banker named Henry Philip Hope in 1839. That is when it got the name we know today, the Hope Diamond. The Hope family owned it for decades. But the stories of misfortune continued. It is said the family's fortune dwindled. They were forced to sell the diamond in 1901. It passed through the hands of several dealers and owners. One was a French broker named Jacques Collot, who supposedly went insane and committed suicide. Another was a Russian prince who supposedly gave it to an actress and then shot her. He himself was later stabbed to death. The diamond's most famous American owner was Evelyn Walsh McLean, a wealthy socialite who bought it in 1911. The jeweler Pierre Cartier deliberately played up the curse story to entice her. Miss McLean wore the diamond constantly. She even had it put on the collar of her dog. And her life was filled with tragedy. Her young son was killed in a car crash. Her husband left her for another woman and later died in a mental institution. Her daughter died of a drug overdose. Her family's newspaper, the Washington Post, went bankrupt. McLean herself died in debt. After her death, the diamond was sold to jeweler Harry Winston. But Winston seems to have been immune to the curse. He did not keep it. Instead, in 1958, he did something incredible. He donated the Hope Diamond to the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C. He famously sent it to the museum in a plain brown paper package through the registered mail. It has been there ever since, one of the most popular museum objects in the world. So, is the curse real? Almost certainly not. The story of the stolen temple eye was likely invented in the early 20th century to add mystique to the stone. Many of the supposed victims of the curse, like the Russian prince, probably never existed. The tragedies that befell Evelyn Walsh McLean were real, but her life was turbulent long before she bought the diamond. The curse is a classic case of confirmation bias. We remember the owners who had bad luck and forget the ones who did not. The diamond has been owned by many people, including jewelers and kings, who lived perfectly normal, long lives. The real curse of the Hope Diamond is its beauty and its value. It inspires greed. It leads people to theft, and maybe even to murder. The stories were a great marketing tool for jewelers like Cartier. The curse made the diamond more than just a stone, it made it a legend. Did the mailman who delivered the diamond to the Smithsonian suffer any bad luck? Does the diamond's famous blue color, caused by trace amounts of boron atoms, have any other strange physical properties we don't know about? And if the curse is just a story, why does the legend feel so much more powerful than the truth? Number 8, did a poet's curse haunt an archaeologist? Sometimes the curse is not from the person in the tomb, but from the stories told about them. The ancient Greeks knew how to tell a good story, and one of their best was the story of the House of Atreus. It is a tale of murder, cannibalism, betrayal, and revenge that cursed a family for generations. And at the heart of it was the king, Agamemnon. Agamemnon was the leader of the Greek army in the Trojan War. To get a favorable wind to sail to Troy, he sacrificed his own daughter, Iphigenia, to the gods. His wife, Clytemnestra, never forgave him. When Agamemnon returned from the war victorious, Clytemnestra and her lover murdered him in his bath. This set off another cycle of revenge, with Agamemnon's son, Orestes, killing his own mother to avenge his father. It is a story of a family drenched in blood, a cursed family. For centuries, this was just a myth. The stories written by poets like Homer and Aeschylus, but in the 19th century, a German businessman named Heinrich Schliemann became obsessed with proving that the Trojan War was real. He was a brilliant, ambitious, and controversial man. He used Homer's aid to guide his excavations. In the 1870s, he went to Mycenae in Greece, the city that Homer called the home of Agamemnon. At Mycenae, Schliemann began digging inside the city walls. He found a circle of shaft graves, deep pits filled with the bodies of ancient royalty. And the bodies were covered in gold. He found gold crowns, gold daggers, gold cups. It was one of the most spectacular archaeological finds in history. In one of the graves, he found a gold funeral mask covering the face of a man. The mask showed a powerful, bearded face. Schliemann was convinced. He sent a telegram to the king of Greece. It said, "I have gazed upon the face of Agamemnon. The mask of Agamemnon became instantly famous." It was the face of the Greek myths brought to life, but almost immediately there were problems. Schliemann was a showman. He was known for exaggerating his finds and even for planting artifacts to make his discoveries seem more spectacular. Other archaeologists started to question the mask. The style of the mask, particularly the handlebar mustache, looked more like the style of the 19th century than the 16th century BC, when the person in the grave had lived. Modern archaeological analysis, led by scholars like William Calder III and David Trail, has shown that the grave where the mask was found is from a period about 300 years before the traditional date of the Trojan War. So whoever the man in the grave was, he was not Homer's Agamemnon. This is the curse that haunted Schliemann. The curse of his own ambition. He wanted so badly to find Agamemnon that he may have bent the truth. Some scholars have even suggested that Schliemann had the mask made himself, or at least had it altered to look more impressive, more heroic. The debate still rages today. Most archaeologists believe the mask is genuine, but that Schliemann was simply wrong about who it belonged to. But the shadow of doubt remains. Schliemann's life after the discovery was not a happy one. He was constantly embroiled in bitter academic disputes. His health failed. He died in 1890, still defending his discoveries and his methods. The curse of the House of Atreus, the curse of pride and ambition leading to ruin, seemed to have found a new victim in the man who dug it up. He gazed upon the face of a king, but he may have been blinded by the gold. Is the Mask of Agamemnon a genuine artifact from 1600 BC, or was it tampered with by Schliemann? If we used modern non-destructive analysis on the mask, could we settle the question of its creation once and for all? And is the greatest curse on an archaeologist not a supernatural force, but the temptation to make the evidence fit the story they want to tell? Or number 7, can a man of ice kill from the past? In September 1991, 2 German hikers, Helmut and Erika Simon, were walking in the Ötztal Alps on the border between Austria and Italy. They strayed from the path and found something sticking out of the melting ice of a glacier. They thought it was the body of a lost modern mountaineer. They were wrong. It was the body of a man who had died 5,300 years ago. He was named Ötzi the Iceman after the valley where he was found. He was the best preserved prehistoric human ever discovered. The ice had kept his body, his clothes, and his equipment in near perfect condition. He had leather shoes, a grass cloak, a copper axe, a bow and arrows, and even a small pouch with medicinal fungi. It was an unprecedented window into the world of the Copper Age. Scientists from all over the world flocked to study him. They analyzed his DNA, the contents of his stomach, the pollen on his clothes, and the tattoos on his body. They learned what he ate for his last meal: ibex and red deer meat, where he grew up near the village of Feldthurns, south of the Alps, and that he suffered from Lyme disease and lactose intolerance. They even found out how he died. An arrowhead was lodged in his left shoulder. He had been shot from behind. He likely bled to death in minutes. Ötzi was the victim of the world's oldest known murder. But as the research continued, a new story began to emerge, a story of a curse. People connected to the discovery of Ötzi started to die. The media loved it. They called it the curse of the Iceman. The first was Rainer Henn, a forensic pathologist who was one of the first to examine the body. He put the frozen corpse into a body bag with his bare hands. A year later, in 1992, he was killed in a car crash on his way to a conference to speak about Ötzi. The second was Kurt Fritz, the mountain guide who led Henn to the body. He died in an avalanche. The third was Helmut Simon, one of the original hikers who found the body. In 2004, he went hiking in the same area where he had found Ötzi. He was caught in a freak blizzard and fell to his death. His body was found frozen in the ice, just like the Iceman himself. The list went on. A journalist who filmed the excavation died of a brain tumor. An archaeologist who studied the body died of a blood disorder. Another expert died of multiple sclerosis. The story was compelling. The murdered Iceman was taking his revenge on those who had disturbed his long sleep. But is there really a curse? Let's look at the numbers. The list of the cursed victims usually numbers around 7 people. But hundreds of people have been involved in the recovery, study, and preservation of Ötzi's body over the past 3 decades. The vast majority of them are alive and well. Mark Nelson, a researcher from Monash University in Australia, did a statistical analysis of the so-called curse. He compared the death rate of the Ötzi team to the death rate of the general population. His conclusion, published in 2005, was clear. There was no statistically significant increase in deaths. The people who died were, on average, no younger than you would expect. The causes of their deaths were unfortunate, but not statistically unlikely. Helmut Simon, for example, was an experienced hiker, but hiking in the Alps is inherently dangerous. The curse of the Iceman is a product of media hype and cherry-picking data. We focus on the few who died tragically and ignore the hundreds who did not. The story of a vengeful ice mummy is just more exciting than the reality of coincidence and random chance. The real story of Ötzi is not about a curse. It is about a 5,300-year-old murder mystery, and how modern science is solving it. Why was Ötzi killed? Was it a personal dispute, a robbery, or a ritual sacrifice? Who was the person who shot him with an arrow, and what can the DNA of the bacteria found in his gut tell us about the history of human migration and disease? Number 6. Could mold be the real monster in the tomb? In 1973, a team of 12 archaeologists opened a tomb in the Wawel Cathedral in Krakow, Poland. It was the final resting place of King Casimir IV Jagiellon, a powerful Polish monarch who had died in 1492. The team was excited. It was a rare opportunity to study the undisturbed remains of a major historical figure. But soon after the tomb was opened, their excitement turned to fear. Within a few days, several members of the team started to feel unwell. They complained of fever, aches, and respiratory problems. Then, they started to die. Over the next few years, at least 4 of the original 12 scientists died from unusual cancers and infections. Others suffered from long-term health problems. The Polish press began to talk of a curse, an echo of the famous curse of King Tut's tomb, which had been opened 50 years earlier. Had King Casimir, like the pharaohs, placed a curse on his tomb to protect it? The story seemed to fit. The king's body was found in a decaying wooden coffin. It was a humid, sealed environment. The scientists had worked in a small crypt for months, breathing in the musty air. It seemed like a classic case of, a supernatural curse at work. But one of the scientists on the team, a microbiologist named Bolesław Smiek, had a different idea. He suspected the killer was not a ghost, but something much smaller, a fungus. Smiek took samples from the inside of the tomb. He cultured them in his lab. He found something deadly. The tomb was teeming with several species of fungi, but one was particularly dangerous, Aspergillus flavus. This is a common mold, but it can produce a powerful mycotoxin called aflatoxin. Aflatoxins are some of the most carcinogenic substances known to science. They can cause liver cancer and suppress the immune system, leaving the body vulnerable to other infections. Smiek's research showed that the mold had been growing on the king's body and in the tomb for 500 years. When the tomb was opened, the scientists inhaled massive quantities of the fungal spores. This sudden, high-level exposure to aflatoxin was likely what caused the cancers and other illnesses that killed them. The curse was real, but it was a biological curse, not a magical one. This discovery was a landmark moment in archaeology. It provided the first strong scientific evidence for a plausible natural explanation for the curse of the pharaohs. The idea that ancient tombs could contain dangerous, sealed-in pathogens became a serious concern for archaeologists everywhere. Today, anyone excavating a sealed tomb takes major precautions. They wear respirators, protective clothing, and use special air filtration systems. The story of King Casimir's tomb changed how we see the past. The danger was not from angry spirits. The danger was from the very air inside the tomb. The ancient dead could still kill, not with magic, but with microbiology. The monster in the tomb was real. It was just too small to see. How many other historical curses can be explained by exposure to toxic molds and bacteria? What other undiscovered microorganisms might be waiting in sealed environments? And could they pose a threat to future archaeologists? And does knowing the scientific cause of the deaths make the story of Casimir's tomb any less creepy? Number 5, is an emperor's tomb protected by a river of poison? Some tombs are protected by curses, some are protected by science, and one is protected by both. It is the tomb of the first emperor of China, Qin Shi Huang. He was the man who unified China in 221 BC, built the first version of the Great Wall, and standardized Chinese writing and currency. He was also a megalomaniac obsessed with finding the secret to eternal life, and his tomb reflects that obsession. We have not even seen the tomb itself. The central tomb, a massive pyramid-shaped mound, remains unexcavated, but we know what surrounds it. In 1974, a group of farmers digging a well near the mound stumbled upon one of the most astonishing archaeological discoveries ever made. They found a life-sized clay soldier. They had discovered the terracotta army. For the last 50 years, archaeologists have been excavating the pits around the emperor's tomb. They have uncovered more than 8,000 terracotta soldiers, each with a unique face. There are also archers, cavalry, and chariots. It is an entire army built to protect the emperor in the afterlife. But this incredible army is just the outer guard. The real secrets lie in the central tomb, which has never been opened. Why not? The Chinese government is extremely cautious. They want to wait until they have the technology to excavate and preserve whatever is inside without damaging it. But there is another reason, a much more frightening one. The tomb is rumored to be protected by a deadly curse, and this curse is backed up by ancient texts and modern science. The historian Sima Qian, writing about a century after the emperor's death, described the tomb in detail. He wrote that the tomb contains a replica of the emperor's entire kingdom, with palaces and towers. And most importantly, he wrote that the tomb has rivers of flowing mercury meant to represent the Yangtze and Yellow rivers. The mercury was designed to be a deadly trap for anyone who broke in, a river of liquid poison. For a long time, historians thought this was just a legend, but in the 1980s, scientists began testing the soil in the mound above the tomb. They found mercury levels that were hundreds of times higher than normal background levels. The pattern of the high mercury concentrations even seems to map out the shape of a river system. It seems Sima Qian was telling the truth. The emperor's tomb is very likely flooded with a huge amount of toxic liquid mercury. This is the ultimate curse. It is a physical, chemical deterrent. Anyone who tries to break into the tomb would be exposed to lethal levels of mercury vapor. The curse is not magic, it is poison. It has successfully protected the tomb for over 2,200 years. The Chinese government has no plans to open the tomb anytime soon. The technical challenges of dealing with the mercury, combined with the preservation risks, are just too great. So, the first emperor continues to lie undisturbed, surrounded by his clay army and his rivers of poison. He did not achieve immortality in life, but he may have achieved it in death by creating a tomb that is simply too dangerous to enter. What other treasures and secrets are inside the central tomb? Does it really contain a perfect model of his empire? And when we do finally develop the robotic technology to safely enter the tomb, will we find that the rivers of mercury were just the first of many deadly traps the emperor designed to protect his eternal rest? Number 4. Did opening a warlord's grave unleash a world war? Some coincidences are so perfect, so chilling, that they are hard to dismiss as just chance. The story of Timur's tomb is one of them. Timur, also known as Tamerlane, was a 14th century Turco-Mongol conqueror. He was a brilliant but utterly ruthless military leader who built a vast empire across Central Asia. He saw himself as the heir to Genghis Khan. His campaigns were infamous for their brutality. He is said to be responsible for the deaths of 17 million people, about 5% of the world's population at the time. Timur died in 1405 and was buried in a magnificent tomb called the Gur-i-Amir in Samarkand, modern-day Uzbekistan. His tomb was a place of reverence and fear, and it carried a warning. An inscription on his tombstone read, "Whoever opens my tomb shall unleash an invader more terrible than I." A second inscription inside the casket was even more direct. "When I rise from the dead, the world shall tremble." For centuries, no one dared to disturb him. But in 1941, Samarkand was part of the Soviet Union. Joseph Stalin, the Soviet dictator, was interested in the great conquerors of the past. He ordered a team of Soviet archaeologists to open Timur's tomb. The head of the expedition was an anthropologist named Mikhail Gerasimov, who is famous for his ability to reconstruct faces from skulls. The local people in Samarkand were horrified. Elders and religious leaders begged the Soviets not to open the tomb. They warned them about the curse. They told them it would bring a terrible war. The Soviet scientists, being good communists, dismissed these warnings as superstition. The excavation went ahead. On June 20th, 1941, Gerasimov's team lifted the heavy stone lid of Timur's sarcophagus. Inside, they found the skeleton of a powerful man. He had been tall and had a lame leg, just as the historical records described. The scientists were thrilled. They had their proof. They took the skull and skeleton back to Moscow to study. 2 days later, on June 22nd, 1941, Adolf Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa. Nazi Germany invaded the Soviet Union. It was the largest and deadliest invasion in the history of warfare. An invader more terrible than Timur had been unleashed. The world trembled. The war on the Eastern Front was apocalyptic. Millions of people died. The Soviet Union was pushed to the brink of collapse. Stalin, who had dismissed the curse as nonsense, apparently started to have second thoughts. As the war got worse for the Soviets, he became increasingly paranoid. In late 1942, Stalin ordered that Timur's remains be returned to Samarkand. He wanted the warlord to be reburied with full Islamic religious rites. A special plane was arranged to fly the skeleton back from Moscow. On November 20th, 1942, Timur was reinterred in his tomb. At that very moment, halfway across the country, the Soviet army launched Operation Uranus. This was the massive counterattack at the Battle of Stalingrad. The operation was a huge success. It encircled and trapped the German Sixth Army. The Battle of Stalingrad is widely seen as the major turning point of World War II on the Eastern Front. From that point on, the tide of the war turned against Germany. The timing is almost unbelievable. The tomb is opened and the war begins. The body is returned and the tide of the war turns. It is easy to see why people believe it was a curse. The connection is too direct, too powerful to ignore. Of course, the rational explanation is that it was a coincidence. Hitler had been planning to invade the Soviet Union for months. The date was set long before the archaeologists opened a tomb in Samarkand. The victory at Stalingrad was the result of massive military planning and sacrifice, not the reburial of a medieval warlord. But the story remains. It is a powerful reminder that sometimes history has a sense of poetry. A dark, terrifying poetry. Was Stalin genuinely spooked by the curse, or was reburying Timur a propaganda move to win support from the Muslim populations of Central Asia during the war? Could the stress and psychological pressure of defying a well-known curse have affected the Soviet leadership in some small way? And if it was just a coincidence, is it not one of the most terrifying coincidences in all of history? Number 3, did the first tomb raiders face the first curses? The idea of the pharaoh's curse is forever linked with one name, Tutankhamun. But the curse is much, much older than King Tut. In fact, the ancient Egyptians themselves were the first to worry about it. And they were not worried about archaeologists, they were worried about tomb robbers. Tomb robbery was a major problem in ancient Egypt. The pharaohs were buried with immense wealth, gold, jewelry, fine furniture. It was a huge temptation for the poor, and it was an inside job. The people who knew where the tombs were and how to get into them were often the same workers who had built them. As soon as a pharaoh was buried, the clock started ticking on how long their tomb would remain sealed. So, the Egyptians developed a security system. The first layer was physical. They built pyramids with secret passages and heavy stone blocking plugs. They hid tombs in remote secret valleys like the Valley of the Kings. But they knew physical security was not enough, so they added a second layer, a magical or religious one. It's a curse. These were not the vague, media-friendly curses of the movies. These were specific written threats carved into the walls of the tombs for anyone who entered to see. These curse inscriptions are mostly found not in royal tombs, but in the private tombs of high officials from the Old Kingdom, around 2500 BC. A famous example is from the tomb of a man named Kentika Ikeki. His inscription is very direct. It says, "As for all men who shall enter this my tomb, impure, there will be a judgment, an end shall be made for him. I shall seize his neck like a bird, I shall cast the fear of myself into him." It is a personal threat from the spirit of the dead man. He is promising to come after you personally. Another inscription in the tomb of Ankh-Mahor warns what will happen to a tomb robber. "As for anything that you might do against this my tomb, the same shall be done to your property." It is a threat of supernatural retribution. It even mentions that the crocodile and the hippopotamus will be the instruments of this vengeance. These curses were not aimed at future archaeologists. They were aimed at contemporary Egyptian tomb robbers. They were a form of psychological warfare. The goal was to scare off a potential thief who would have believed in the power of these magical spells. The curses invoked the anger of the gods like Thoth and Anubis. They threatened horrible fates in the afterlife. Did they work? Not really. Almost every single pharaoh's tomb from the ancient world was looted in antiquity. The lure of gold was stronger than the fear of a ghost. The tomb of Tutankhamun is the great exception. It was one of the only royal tombs found mostly intact, and that was probably just because its location was lost. The entrance was covered by the debris from the construction of a later tomb, so the robbers simply could not find it. So the original Egyptian curses were a failure. But the idea of them, the concept of a magical protection on a tomb, survived. It was this ancient idea that was revived in the 19th and 20th centuries by European writers and journalists. They took the old Egyptian beliefs and repackaged them for a modern audience, creating the legend of the curse of the pharaohs that we know today. The original curses were real, but they were local, specific, and ultimately ineffective. The modern curse is a myth, but it has proven to be far more powerful and enduring. Why are there so few curse inscriptions in the royal tombs of the New Kingdom, like the Valley of the Kings? Did the pharaohs believe they were so powerful that they did not need to write down the threats? Or were there magical protections of a different, non-written kind? And does the fact that Tut's tomb was the one that survived intact give any credibility to the idea that it was uniquely protected? Number 2, can a whole valley be cursed? Sometimes a curse is not on a single tomb, but on an entire place. A place where the dead are so numerous that their presence seems to haunt the very ground. In 1996, the famous Egyptian archaeologist Zahi Hawass was working near the Baharia Oasis, a remote spot in the western desert of Egypt. A security guard's donkey stumbled, its leg falling into a hole. The guard looked down and saw something glittering. It was gold. Howis began to excavate. What he found was staggering. It was not a single tomb. It was a massive necropolis, a huge city of the dead. It covered nearly 4 square miles, and it was filled with mummies, thousands of them. Many were decorated with beautiful gilded masks and painted chest plates. The media called it the Valley of the Golden Mummies. The dates from the Greco-Roman period in Egypt, from about 332 BC to 395 AD. This was a time when Egypt was ruled by foreigners, but the old Egyptian burial customs, like mummification, continued. The mummies in this valley were not great pharaohs. They were ordinary middle-class people, merchants, officials, farmers. They had spent their life savings to ensure they would have a proper burial and a chance at eternal life. The sheer number of mummies is hard to comprehend. Hawass estimates that there could be as many as 10,000 mummies buried in the valley. So far, only a few hundred have been excavated. The curse of this place is not one of sudden death or strange accidents. It is a curse of atmosphere, a deep, unsettling feeling of being surrounded by the dead. Zahi Hawass himself has written about the eerie feeling of working in the valley. In his book, The Valley of the Golden Mummies, he describes a strange incident. One night, he was walking near one of the tombs with a young boy. The boy suddenly started screaming, pointing at the entrance to the tomb. He yelled, "The child! The child is pulling me!" He was terrified. Hawass looked and saw nothing. But the boy's fear was real. Later, when they excavated that tomb, they found the mummy of a child inside. Hawass also describes a dream he had. In the dream, 2 of the golden mummies came to life. Their eyes followed him. A child mummy ran towards him. He woke up in a cold sweat. He is a scientist, a man of logic, but he admitted that the atmosphere of the valley, the presence of so many thousands of dead, can get to you. It is a psychological curse. The other curse on the Valley of the Golden Mummies is a practical one. It is the curse of preservation. The site is so huge, and the mummies so numerous that it is a massive challenge to protect it. The mummies are fragile. Once exposed to the air and humidity, they begin to decay. Looting is also a constant threat in such a remote area. The Egyptian government has to spend huge resources to secure the site. The valley's greatest treasure, its sheer scale, is also its greatest vulnerability. This is a different kind of curse. It is not about a single angry spirit. It is about the collective weight of the past. The feeling that you are an intruder in a place that belongs to the dead. The psychological pressure of working in a place where you are outnumbered by the mummified remains of an entire civilization. It is a curse born of archaeology itself. What stories could the thousands of unexcavated mummies tell us about daily life in Roman Egypt? Can we use modern technology like ground-penetrating radar to map the entire necropolis without disturbing the tombs? And is the feeling of being watched in the valley just a product of our imagination? Or is there something about a place with so many dead that leaves a real tangible presence behind? But number 1, what really killed Lord Carnarvon? This is it, the big one, the story that defines the modern idea of a cursed tomb. It is the story of a boy king, a determined archaeologist, and a string of mysterious deaths that captivated the world. It is the story of Tutankhamun. In November 1922, the British archaeologist Howard Carter made the discovery of a lifetime. After years of searching in Egypt's Valley of the Kings, he found the entrance to a sealed tomb. On his financial backer, a wealthy English aristocrat named George Herbert, the 5th Earl of Carnarvon, rushed to Egypt to be there for the opening. On November 26th, Carter made a small hole in the doorway. He held a candle inside. Carnarvon asked him, "Can you see anything?" Carter replied with the famous words, "Yes, wonderful things." The tomb was almost perfectly intact. It was filled with thousands of incredible treasures: a golden throne, alabaster vases, chariots, and 3 nested coffins, the innermost one made of solid gold. It was the richest archaeological find in history, and it belonged to a minor, almost unknown pharaoh named Tutankhamun, who had died over 3,000 years before. The world went wild with Tutmania. The discovery was front-page news everywhere. But then the story took a dark turn. People started to die. The first and most famous victim was Lord Carnarvon himself. Just 5 months after opening the tomb, in April 1923, he died in his hotel in Cairo. The official cause was blood poisoning, which led to pneumonia. He had been bitten on the cheek by a mosquito. The bite became infected, possibly when he cut it while shaving. The infection spread and he died. But the coincidences started to pile up. At the exact moment of his death, all the lights in Cairo supposedly went out due to a power failure. While back in England, at his ancestral home, Highclere Castle, his favorite dog Susie let out a howl and died. The story of the curse was born. It was fueled by newspaper reporters like Arthur Weigall, a rival Egyptologist who was angry that Carnarvon had sold exclusive story rights to the Times of London. Weigall was there at the opening of the tomb and reportedly said, "If he goes down in that spirit, I give him 6 weeks to live." After Carnarvon, the list of victims grew. George J. Gould, a wealthy American who visited the tomb, died of a fever a few months later. Aubrey Herbert, Carnarvon's half-brother, who was also present at the opening, died of blood poisoning. Sir Archibald Douglas Reed, the radiologist who x-rayed the mummy, died of a mysterious illness. Carter's personal secretary, Richard Bethel, was found dead in his bed. His father then committed suicide. The public was convinced the boy king was taking his revenge, but what does science say? The scientific explanation for the curse has several parts. The first is the same one we saw in King Casimir's tomb: toxic mold. A sealed tomb could contain dangerous pathogens like aspergillus. Spores released when the tomb was opened could have been inhaled. This could be particularly dangerous for someone with a weakened immune system, and Lord Carnarvon's immune system was weak. He had been in a serious car accident years earlier that had left him with chronic lung problems. An infection that a healthy person might fight off could be deadly for him. Another theory points to bat guano. The tomb could have been home to bats, and their droppings can carry a fungus that causes the lung disease histoplasmosis. Other theories suggest toxic chemicals used in the mummification process could have been sealed in the air. But the most powerful argument against the curse is statistics. A study by Dr. Mark Nelson, the same researcher who studied the Otzi curse, looked at the survival rates of the people who were actually present when the tomb was opened. He tracked 44 Westerners who were in Egypt for the discovery. He found that the 25 who were present at the opening of the tomb or the sarcophagus did not die any earlier than those who were not. In fact, their average age at death was 70. Howard Carter, the man who spent more time in the tomb than anyone, lived for another 17 years, dying at the age of 64. The Curse of King Tut was a media creation. It was a perfect storm of a spectacular discovery, a sudden death, and a public hungry for a mystical story. The other deaths were a mix of coincidence and cherry-picked facts. Many of the supposed victims were already elderly or in poor health. Others had never even been to Egypt. The story of the curse was simply too good to let the facts get in the way. But even with the scientific and statistical explanations, the legend endures. The image of the golden mask of Tutankhamun is forever tied to the idea of a deadly curse. It is the story we want to believe. What specific strain of bacteria or fungus, if any, was present in Tutankhamun's tomb? If Lord Carnarvon's immune system was already compromised, was the opening of the tomb the final trigger that led to his death, even if it was not a supernatural cause? And if the curse is just a story, why has it become the most famous and powerful legend in all of archaeology?